Thanks for joining me this afternoon then. Say I'm a day early, but that doesn't matter at all. I had this project ready. It's a few techniques, and I suppose in itself it's basically quite simple, but it's just a really nice card, again, that you can adapt to whatever you have in your stash actually, and to adapt to whoever you may be giving the card to. I do like to come up with these designs where if you want to sit in batch make, you can get a really lovely effect just by changing the colour, cardstock, changing the ink, but basically keep the structure of the card the same. So I shall press on. I've created the background myself. It's like a watercolour technique, and I suppose that's something that I wanted to introduce you to today. It's just something very simple, watercolour technique using distress inks. And what I might do in future weeks actually is I might start going down the watercolour route a little bit more using distress inks, and just showing you different ways of how to colour images, stamped images, with your inks and your water brushes, just to get a different effect from them really, and just to get more out of your distress inks too. I think it's always useful to have the products that you collect and buy to do so many different things for you, so you really get your money's worth out of them. I think that's really important. So hopefully I can give you a few more ideas today and over the coming weeks on how to use your distress inks. So today the card I'm using is actually based on watercolour card, mainly because of this technique I have in the background. So I have a piece of watercolour card here. We'll just cut it down to size, and this is because I'll be using a lot of water, and I don't want the card to warp too much, and I find that with Lisa Super Smooth it doesn't take water very well. It's not designed for that, to be fair. It's perfect for stamping on, but not to take a lot of wet and heavy mediums like that. But watercolour card is perfect. Say is that little bit thicker. The two colours I'm using today, and I'm actually using just distress ink at the moment. I may do, if I get into play mode a little bit, I may add some the oxides on top, but I shall start off with the distress inks. Let me just move that down so you can see them on screen. Who else have we got? Oh, we've got Christine with us as well. Lovely. Oh, it's lovely to see so many people here on a Monday. That's great. Okay, so I've chosen these two colours because well, blue's my favourite colour, and I think that the yellow goes with it really well. To start with my watercolour card, I'm going to create like just a wet background basically. There's a couple of different ways of doing this. You'd see other people putting their distress ink onto their mat, and this is what Lisa's messy mat is absolutely perfect for. So you put the ink down, you spray the ink on the mat with a little bit of water, and then you pick up the ink like so. I wanted to have a little bit more control over where the ink is placed today, so this is why I'm doing it this way. So I have one of my water brushes. This is one of Lisa's water brushes, which they're absolutely brilliant to use. I had a quick check. They're not on a website at the moment, not that I could see, but I only had a really quick check. They may be on the Create and Craft website, I'm not entirely sure. But I know one of our lovely customers did purchase a set the other day, so they're either hiding from me or they're perhaps due in stock very soon. So the set actually comes with 6 brushes, and it's actually a really useful set because 3 of the brushes, oh, let me just take the lid off. Okay, 3 of the brushes come with a flat nib like this. I don't know if you can see that there. Let's just hold that against the darker card. And 3 of the brushes come with like a round brush, more like a paintbrush like this. They all come in different. The 3 flat ones come in 3 different sizes, and the 3 round ones come in 3 different sizes. So they are really useful for all different types of uses. on your card. Now you fill the reservoir, and then you have a push button here that releases the water. Now if you don't have this, then obviously you can just use a jar of water and a paintbrush, a regular paintbrush. That would work just as well. Now I didn't prime these before I got going. Okay, there we are, the water's coming out. Right, so what I'm doing initially, because as I say, I want to have a little bit more control as to where my ink is going to spread. So all I'm doing is just basically swiping the water brush to create a patch just central on my watercolour card. And you can see where the ink has spread to on my original one here. That's sort of the area and the coverage that I want to have on this. So I have a dry area around the outside of my watercolour card. So add quite a lot of water. You can be quite generous with that. Now the next thing I want to do, and this is where you will see me put the ink on the mat, but instead of picking it up traditionally by dipping my paper into this, I'm actually just going to use my messy mat as a reservoir. So you may have Lisa's new mixed media mat, the silicone mat, so you could use that just as well. So now what we're going to do is just add a little bit of extra water onto my inks, and you can see, yes you can see the way that beads. And all I'm just going to do is just pick up some of the ink and just start dabbing this within the wet area on my watercolour card. Now I'm going to be quite liberal with the water because I don't want brush marks to be appearing here. So I'm just going to wipe my brush off on a piece of cloth there, and now I'm going to just come in with the yellow, and you can see just how loose I'm going. I'm sticking with the area within the card that I made wet, and I'm just spreading the ink into each other so they do mix a little bit. And I want to come back in with a bit more blue, so you can see now that the colours blend and we have some green emerging also. So I mean, don't be too precious with this is all that I would say. Just have a little bit of fun, and I would say paint as kids would paint, because if you, I don't know if many of you've noticed, but if you give children water and a paintbrush, they'll just go for it. And I know when I used to craft with my two lads, they really didn't have any thinking time whatsoever. I just give them the stuff and away they'd go, and they just deal with whatever it was that they created, and they'd be dead chuffed with that. They'd have a fabulous time. And I think sometimes as adults we can contemplate too much, and we can think about things too much. So I'd say just go for it. And I do appreciate it takes a little bit of practice, because I'm a great one for procrastination. I sit there and think, should I put it here, should I put it there, and then all of a sudden I've lost the randomness of what it is I'm doing. Okay, so now you can see that I've added my colour, and you can see now that the ink has only really been spread into the areas that I wet initially. The idea of actually wetting the cardstock beforehand is to allow that more even spread of the ink over the watercolour card. Otherwise you'd have sort of I think you'd perhaps have a harder time just blending out the colour. Now I'm just going to dry this, because I will be adding detail on top of this with stamps and ink, so obviously we want to have this as dry as possible. And also with layering techniques, when you're using distress inks, it's always good to dry your layers in between. And I know when I first started using distress inks and I used to layer up, and I used to find I used to end up with a real muddy mess, and it was because I didn't dry my layers in between each time. If I hadn't have dried that and I wanted to add more layers on top of that, then I would have lost the sort of the blending that I have here now in front of you. So say it's always good to dry. You have to take that little bit of patience. Just allow, you can either allow it to dry naturally, which it does take a little bit longer, but if you're doing lots of backgrounds on the go, then that'd be perfect. Or you can use your heat tool, which again does the job perfectly well. Now I will just add a little bit more detail around this time. Oh, that's the little one that I want to use. And this time I'm going to add on my distress oxides, I think, just a little bit, just to show you how the two inks layer together. Now I'm going to use a technique very similar to the one where you put the ink on the mat and you dab into it. But as I said, because you're doing this sort of more blind, you have less control over where the ink's going, and I do want to keep this white border. So the alternative way to do that is to actually use one of your acrylic blocks. Okay, so we spread the ink on your acrylic block like so. Now I don't want to have too much, I may have put a bit too much on there. So you put your ink on your acrylic block, and I'm using the same colours, again a blue and a yellow. Now you put your, just get myself some copy paper. Okay, so now I've spread the ink on to my acrylic block and I've sprayed it with water. Now what we're going to do is basically use this as a stamp. Now what you can do, you can actually then start taking the ink from the acrylic block onto your project like so, and because you're using your acrylic block, you actually have control over where that ink is being placed. Can you see? Because obviously you can see through the block and you're not working blind onto your project, so you can see you have an awful lot more control of the ink going onto the project there. So I shall do that again, and I will add some yellow. Now I used a chipped sapphire distress oxide, whereas I would have preferred to have used a faded jeans, which was the distress ink that I used in the background. Unfortunately I don't have the oxide for the faded jeans, so I feel like I might need to go shopping and correct that. That's not on, is it? But ideally I would have said use the same shade of ink. So with the yellow that I'm going in now, I do actually have the this distress oxide and the normal distress ink for the fossilised amber, because I really want that tone effect. I really want those colours to match each other, and because you're using two different inks, we're going to have that tone. Now we've had some fabulous lives both from Lisa and Dawn and Heidi going through the advantages of the different inks, so they'll be worth looking back on. Now I'm doing the same process again, and I'm just taking my acrylic block. You can see that I was dabbing some of the water off, some of the moisture off on a piece of copy paper, just spare paper, because I don't want to flood the project too much, and I just wanted this sort of effect. And you can see there. Now what I do like to do, just to tone down those effects, I just want to blot that a little bit, so it still leaves the residue behind, but you still have that mottled effect of what you've just done. And because you've used oxides, it will sit differently on top of the regular distress ink. Now I'm just going to heat that because I want to stamp on top. And this layer is just really all about creating texture. Oh, hi Laxmi, you've oh, the card I'm using is actually watercolour cardstock for this, because if you see the amount of water that I'm adding to my inks, I'm actually using a watercolour cardstock, which is very, a lot thicker and obviously designed to take all the moisture, so we have far less warping of the card. You do have a little bit, so you can just see now that I'm just trying to sort of manipulate that back into shape a little bit. And what I do find actually, once I've actually created the background, I would actually put this usually under my desk actually, because I've got a plastic covering that sits on top of my desk, and I slide that underneath and I work away on top here, and the pressure of that just smooths out this card a little bit. The other thing you could also is actually tape this down. I know that's what watercolour artists do when they're using their card and actually painting. They tape it down and that saves the card from warping even less. But obviously with the techniques that we use, that isn't always feasible. Okay, so now we have our background there, so it's time to bring in some stamps. Now I'm using the music stamp because I haven't used it in a little while. There's a few left on Lisa's website, and I thought it would be a really nice background. But you can use some stencils, or you can use other background stamps that you may have that would work perfectly. Okay, so I'm just going to place this like that. Now the idea now, I'm actually using some archival ink, which is again in the same distress colours as what I was using here, so I really am keeping this colour theme going all the way through. And when I stamp this music stamp on here, I want to keep the tone of the yellow, and then I want to keep the tone of the blue in the stamping as best I can. I mean, obviously it's not going to be an exact science, so just offering the stamp like this. This area of the stamp is going to go into the yellow section, so I know to actually ink this part of the stamp with my yellow ink. Now you could use the distress inks for this, or even the oxides, but I wanted a bit more sort of clarity in the stamp that I'm adding, and this is more of a permanent type of ink. Okay, and I shall ink this section in blue. Now you'll notice also that I'm not actually putting this stamp on a stamping block due to the size of it, and because I'm actually using this in the background, I'm not overly fussed if I don't get an absolutely perfect impression, because this is all about layering the background here. So I want to have the impression of music in the background, but I don't need it to be an absolutely perfect stamp. So let's see how that goes. And you can see there that the actual blue part of the stamp has come out a lot brighter than the yellow, but that's fine. We've still got some texture going on there. That's absolutely fine. And I think also what I might do this time round that I didn't do before, I might just actually introduce a little bit of a stencil into the yellow area here. I'm using the bubble wrap stencil, but anything that you have that you think that might work really well, it would be perfect. Now just come in with, now I want to be this really faint, so I'm using Lisa's brushes, and I'm just going to use the yellow on top of the yellow ink and just very gently brush just a bit of texture into this yellow section. To say, it's at the moment all the detail I'm adding, I don't want it to be bold. It really is just building the layers and just building the interest that will accent the die cuts that I'm going to sit on top. So that's just enough. I don't know if you can see that. Hopefully you can. I'll just wait for my video to catch up. Let's see if there are any other questions. Oh, it's great to see so many people online with me actually. It's so nice to craft with people, it really is. As much as it is my little solace and I come into my little room here to craft, it's nice to share techniques. Oh yes, my video's caught up and you can just see there's just a tiny amount of texture there, so that just all adds to the interest in the background. So now I think we'll leave that as is, and we'll go ahead and start adding our die cuts. Now for this, on my original card I used the 4-point blooms. It was a companion connection. We have stamps and we have the dies. This is what I used for this card, but I thought let's change it up a little bit, and for this card I will be using the Shabby Florals collection, this die collection, and I've already die cut a lot of those out, so we can have a play with those in a second. I'm also using the nested triangles again. I really like how the angles of the triangles sit against the flowers, and I think this is what would really make it appealing as a card for the guys. You wouldn't necessarily think about putting flowers on cards in men's cards, but I think if you actually pair them up and use the right colours, I think they work so well, particularly if they're gardeners anyway. I think it works. Now with the nested triangles, as I say, I've used these just recently in the past couple of Facebook Lives I've done. I've really enjoyed using them. I've already die cut these for you, and what I've done actually, I've actually die cut a good few. So you can see here I've actually die cut them not to be solid triangles, sorry, but to be frames, and with just a few of the smaller solid ones thrown in. Now for those of you perhaps new to crafting, perhaps new to die cutting in particular, the way to get those these frames, and this is what really demonstrates what makes nesting sets of any shape so useful, is that you actually take out a set of, I can't pick them up. There we are. Okay, so actually create the frames and just choose the selection or the sizes that you want to use, and you actually die cut those directly into your cardstock. You line up the dies like so, like this, and you run them through like that through your die cutting machine, and that is how you end up with frames like this. Now if you wanted this frame to be thicker, you can of course do that, but all you need to do is just remove the right triangles, you know. So we can see here now we have our larger triangle, but only one triangle in the centre. If I were to run that through my die cutting machine, we'd still have a frame, but the thickness of the triangle would be a lot thicker, you see. So that is basically the advantage you have in using nesting shapes of any shape. And it took me a good while. It took me a long while to actually become a die cutter, and because I'm actually I'd always lean towards stamps more actually, but it took me a good while to realise how to layer up and coordinate your dies, especially this type of set, when you're die cutting, to actually get the most out of them. And now I would say, if you just wanted frames, instead of just creating the one frame, stack a lot of your nesting dies together, create lots of frames. And the beauty of Lisa's products is that they come in these folders, so they are ideal for storage. I mean, if you create extra that you don't necessarily use, particularly if you've used perhaps some precious cardstock or papers, pop them in the folder. You know they'll be safe, they won't end up on the floor or falling out over your craft room or so. So those, we're using some of those elements in gold, so I've die cut the triangles in gold. I've also die cut a few of the solid ones as well, just to add some contrast. And I've also gone ahead and die cut some of the Shabby Florals to have a play with also. I've die cut 3 of each, and I've just cut them in white because I really want that contrast of the white against the gold and the background. So initially I think I will work and put my triangles on first, and I may just put them in a slightly different position to this card. Why not? We don't always want to make the same card twice, do we? So this now is really all about playing. and really all about creating something that looks good to your eye. Now I'm layering this onto my card blank first, I think, because I think it really helps to get the measure of the entire project, the size of the entire project, and the colours that you are bordering as well, because I think that can really change the mood of the project. This on its own, as you can see, look quite colourful, but as soon as you put that onto a mounted card blank, it takes on a whole different look, and it can really change the tone, and it can really change the way that you want to finish a project, I think, sometimes. So I think it's important that we'll actually put that on there first, so we know what is what we're dealing with. Now I'm hoping this will stick, because obviously the card has buckled just slightly, but that's probably enough for me to work with. Great. So now I've already added about 1 centimetre extra around the outside with these borders, because I'm not actually constrained to the watercolour cardstock, if that's making sense to you. So I think what we might start doing is just start playing. And again, now this is just go on what looks good to your eye. It really is just a case of playing. You might not use all that you've die cut. Sometimes less is more. Sometimes what you think might look good doesn't always work. But again, it really is just a case of playing. So I think I might go with that arrangement like so. And at this stage, I think I might actually bring in my sentiments. The sentiments I've cut from the black and white wordage sheets. These are the A5 set. Really, really useful. So I've cut myself 2 sentiments, and I'm going to position those because I think it's important that you always have a space for the sentiment, and sometimes I can add these on too late and you haven't always got space for them to sit, and sometimes the embellishments of the card cover over the sentiments also, which again isn't ideal. So I'm going to put these on now and work around them. Now I'm just snipping the ends off so they are just a little bit more inched in. We've got an angle on those, and I'm going to sit those probably, oh no, let's go somewhere a bit different. I might sit them up here actually. Yeah, there we are. Right, now bear with me, it's probably time to start sticking down. So add my glue. Now if you don't have the wordage sheets, but you perhaps have the brand new banner sentiments that Lisa brought to us, they would also work perfectly as well. I don't have those just yet, but they would work so well, and I really like the contrast. Did I glue? I didn't glue that one down, did I? And I really like the contrast of just using the black and white actually. Obviously the white ones you can colour tint. Again, this now, everything I say, this is all working towards what looks good in my eyes, but it really is such a personal choice. Now I'm layering those together because it's just a little bit different, isn't it? We want to create something that's a little out, that stands out. So I'm going to pop those there, and I'm only gluing one end because that just gives these little sentiments just a little bit of freedom, just to pop up from the card, so we've got a little bit of dimension going on there. So now we can start working with the flowers and start bringing these in. Now you'll notice I've actually cut these just from plain white cardstock. Now this is Lisa's cardstock, really just super smooth, clean, white and fresh. I didn't want these in coloured. I just really like the freshness of the white Now I'm just going to see, I've cut out some of the centres which also come in the die set also. You get 2 different sizes. I'm just going to pop those on to the flowers just to see what that does. That does change it straight away, and the black now stands out and ties in with our sentiment here, but I think the flowers need to have a little bit more oomph to them, don't they? So what I'm actually going to do is layer 2 flowers together and just offset them so we can see the petals come out between each other. So you can see that flower actually now has more presence on the card, if that makes sense to you, and you have the impact of the white background. Oh, let's just lay those properly. Now I think what I'll do, I'll just place these and I'll stick these on a bit later on. I may just leave, oh no, I think I might actually layer up these little ones also, just to have those, just to be a little bit more bold on the card. There we go, I think that's working really well. What do you think? Actually, you may even just 2. Now you see here, it's really how it's important to place that sentiment on first, so I can actually work around that sentiment so I don't have any of the flowers covering it over. There we go. So I shall bring in another one of the flowers, just offset those petals slightly, put on one of the centres, black centres, which I think is really striking, and I can sit that on there. Now I think that works just as well, and I think that looks really, really good. Now what you could do, just to highlight it, now you've seen the effect of the flowers, you could perhaps start coming in with a couple more of the triangles. Just slot them in the background here and just see if that works, which I think that does actually. Actually I might just leave it at that, or possibly, now this is where I start faffing, bring in more of a solid gold one like so. If I'm going to do that, but this is where I don't have delicate hands at all. There we are. Now I could perhaps put that little one there. As I say, this is all about playing, and this is where you'll get the fun out of creating these cards. Now the other thing I thought of also, if you perhaps didn't even have black, or you thought the black was too harsh, you could always come in with a fine liner pen and just actually create some detail on the flowers yourself with a fine liner, just like so. If you want to have the white flowers, and I love white flowers in the garden, I mean they are so pretty and fresh. So I'm just adding some detail. Now if we could add some detail to the flower like this, and then you could add the centre flower like so, that could also work, and perhaps work as a layer on one of the flowers too. And that just adds in that extra element of black which we've brought in with the sentiment there. Actually, I think that works quite well sitting on top of there. I just really like that freshness with the black. But as I say, it's have a play. That's what it's all about, and you do whatever looks good to your eye. So there we are. We have 2 cards created in the same way, but they look completely different. Even the backgrounds look so different. Let's see. Really makes them pop. It does, Pat. Particularly if you add the black on there also. again, just have a play. It's about creating that contrast, isn't it? Oh, no worries, Natalia. I have to go and do the school run in a bit also, so thanks for joining me this afternoon, that's great. Yeah, just have a pop. It's safe, and sometimes take yourself out of your comfort zone as well. Just go for something that you perhaps wouldn't do, something out of the ordinary. You don't always have to stick things on straight away. Have a play around. Do you know what, sometimes even going away for half a day, having a cup of tea and then coming back to it, you just get a fresh eyes, a fresh perspective on it. And I think that's how sometimes you can take yourself out of your comfort zone and do something just that little bit different. Oh, okay, Conley says, oh, you like the gold. The gold on the background really pops actually. It's not often I use bling like that, to be honest, but I think that just really lifts it. As I say, especially you can actually see it and it catches the light, which is a bit tricky to show on camera sometimes. So thanks so much for joining me this afternoon. I shall leave that there with you. I'll obviously get this sorted out and loaded onto our YouTube channel probably this evening. Thanks so much for joining me again today. I know it's a day early, but I shall be with you again next Tuesday. I shall use watercolour techniques again, I think. I think that's something that's really worth watching, particularly if you're new to that sort of technique. So have a lovely afternoon, everybody, and I shall see you again next week.